Yes, guys, and welcome back to the Faffing Over Frequency podcast. Now, I have to apologize straight away that this is a longer than usual hiatus. I think it might actually reach 4 weeks between episode 6 and 7. Funny enough, but yeah, life's been busy. Coaching is at an all time high. I have, I think, four new startups coming on board by the start of July here. So it has been hectic, and obviously working on the side of that, my own training, my own meal prep, my own cardio, ticking all them boxes, and then all the little things that are curveballs that life throws in between. So I feel like I kick off every episode of this podcast with an apology about the delay. Maybe guys should just be used to it, or maybe I should set myself different expectations of how frequently I can get out faffing over frequency. But today I want to dive into specifically talking about the gaining phase, like the fact that you might be setting up your macros wrong to sort of propel you in the direction of the most progress possible. And while I look at the Osmo, I also have to mention shout out client Stuart, absolute legend, has hooked me up with the best hat the world has ever seen, a Ben and Jerry's hat out of the Ben and Jerry's store in Stockholm. Probably top five presents of all time. But yeah, get that shout out of the way because that is very much deserved. And yeah, I was buzzing to get my hands on this. So diving right into things, we obviously know we've got our three macronutrients, and then outside of that, we've got your fiber and stuff. That you don't really focus upon too much. But to keep this podcast sort of on the big three: protein, carbs, fats. We're gonna dive into protein first of all. So protein, it's going to contain 4 calories per gram, and the main sort of cloud or cloudy thoughts that go or surround protein is the fact that no one really knows where to set their protein at. Should it be a gram per pound because that's the minimum that they need, or maybe it's this new 0.8 gram per pound of body weight figure or guideline that we're hearing, or do you go up to 300 grams because every pro bodybuilder that's ever sort of reached the peak levels of muscle mass has spent time at over 350 grams of protein? But you have to remember, you're likely a skinny natural bodybuilder. You don't, and you're not on PED, so you're not getting that sort of enhanced response to protein intake that you would get along with alongside assistance or as a result of assistance. So my sort of thoughts on protein as a figure, I would like to hit roughly 1.25 grams per pound of body weight. Now, the reason I go for just over the gram per pound of body weight is because protein has high thermic effect of food. So that means it's going to burn the most amount of calories in order to digest it. So that is one part, one sort of trait of protein that sort of leads you to maintaining a better body composition. The other one is, just got a notification. The other thing is, the in order to keep a leaner body composition, or why protein can be useful in that aspect, is the fact that it's difficult to store as body fat. Now, obviously, calories in, calories out is the biggest dictator, and it's sort of a blurred line on how, to what extent does this difficulty to store as body fat relate to actually gaining body fat. Because realistically, if you eat 1,000 calorie surplus, but it's worth of built up of 250 grams of protein, you're still going to put on body fat. But there is this blurred line where you eat a bit more protein, you're probably not going to, yeah, like if we're talking 30 grams of either protein or carbs, since they're both 4 calories per gram, you're going to store less body fat with the protein, undoubtedly. So those two things are important to bear in mind. Higher thermic effect of food, kind of burn more calories digesting protein, and it's harder to store as body fat. So we know protein's going to be vital for our recovery and building new tissue. So if we know it's going to keep a bit of a higher or a better body composition, why would we follow or hit a protein target that's so just bare minimum? Why would we go for this 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight? And that's the fact that It can be quite rough on appetite. It's going to take a longer time to digest. Obviously, I've said it burns more calories when digesting it, so it's going to take more time to digest. So it's more satiating. It keeps you fuller for longer, and it's also the fact that it is quite rough on digestion. When protein gets high, you've probably all had a shop where protein's maybe 250 grams, and it's like, wow, 200 grams of raw meat in a portion or in a meal really starts to make things struggle. And if you were to bump that up to 300 grams, half of your meal, you're probably spending 20 minutes a meal just eating and chewing, because there's so much protein to go around. So that can have a big impact on digestion. And when you're not sort of empty, that gastric emptying speed is slower because the protein takes longer to digest, and it's also more satiating, it's tougher on digestion. That's not sort of synonymous with a perfect push up of staying hungry with really good digestion, so you're utilizing all this food perfectly. They don't go hand in hand together. So anecdotally, I have found that this 1.25 gram per pound of body weight is the sweet spot for me for digestion. Digestion is perfect on this amount of protein for me. I'm sitting roughly 235 grams at 190 pounds body weight. So digestion's perfect. Appetite is perfect. I can get away with maybe 45 grams of whey per meal, maybe 350 grams of yogurt with a tiny bit of whey, 150 grams raw weight chicken in meals. It's not affecting my digestion at all. My gastric emptying feels like it's moving at a good rate. Bowel movements are good, which is another thing. If you're eating 300 grams of protein, then you're shitting it all out. Probably better to just lower your protein and actually utilize the stuff that you're eating. So we've set up the first thing of the diet: 1.25 grams roughly of protein per pound of body weight. And I will say, anecdotally, I did notice in my last push up when I reached 215 pounds, I did for a short spell pull my protein down to a gram per pound of body weight. Now, I think my protein reached quite high amounts when I was peak body weight 275 or 270 at least. At the peak of food at 4.5k calories. And my appetite stayed quite well, but body composition wasn't too lean. But in the midst of that push up, when I did drop to 1 gram per pound of body weight, I 100% noticed that body composition got a little softer. Even just that slight pullback. And that's why I reversed it. That's why I went back. No, let me add this protein back in and take away that 50 carb, add that 50 protein back, because I noticed body composition actually getting worse. And we want to keep body composition well. It's all well and good getting soft at the end of your push up, but that's as a result, or that's with the goal in mind to extend that time at peak training performance where you're at your strongest. You're not trying to get fat for no reason. That is simply so you can extend the time you're training in this surplus. So, moving away from protein, we have carbs, the fun macro sort of. I'd say I'd consider it the fun macro. What's more fun, carbs, fat, or caffeine? I'll let you decide. But I typically don't give a guideline for estimating your carb amount. I think the way you design your carb intake, it should be prioritized. It should be the macro that's exponentially increased throughout your push-ups. It never stops getting increased. That is the one thing you can push, and you need to push infinitely to your food demands. What is your body demanding to gain weight? You create that surplus or that need, fill that need for food with carbs. So no guideline, no 1.25, no 2 gram per pound of body weight, stuff like that. I think you should establish your protein intake, which we have 1.25 grams a pound if you want to follow in my footsteps, and a baseline fat intake. Now that would look like roughly 45 to 60 grams, but we'll get more into the specifics of fat when we come on to it. So you've established your fat total and your protein total. So you combine those calories, and the remaining calories you have from what you want your surplus calories to be, or your deficit calories, or your maintenance calories to be, you fill them in with carbs. So that might look like 200 protein, 500 carb, 50 fat. That is up to you. But carbs are the main macro that we want to exponentially increase. I use that word exponentially again because that's what it is. You just have to. The sky's the limit with carbs. People reach 1,000 grams of carbs a day in their push-ups because that's simply what their body needs. If they were to fill that in with fat or protein, that's not going to do anything with training performance, and it's going to be more difficult to get in because carbohydrates are the easiest food to get in. They're the best for appetite, and they obviously have the positive impact on training performance. It's going to be the body's preferred energy source using carbohydrates rather than burning ketones or something. If you were to enter a keto diet, that's why you're going to perform at your best when you're in sort of the peak of your push up with the most amount of food until it starts impacting digestion, which is something to bear in mind. But carbs, least satiating macro. They're the most dense. Yes, fats have 9 calories per gram compared to carbs 4 calorie per gram. But the when you consider all aspects of gastric emptying speed, food volume, and how quickly they can be digested, something like 100 calories of white rice is gonna digest a lot faster. And ultimately, yes, it's more volume, but it's going to leave you less satiated than even 100 calories of almond butter. So they are the least satiated macro. They are the most digestion friendly. They're going to have a high gastric emptying speed if you're using a simple carb source, and they have positive impact on training performance. So these are the reasons that carbs just do have no ceiling on them. They create your surplus. Your surplus should be created through carbohydrates. Then moving along to fat. So fat has 9 calories per gram. It is obviously going to be the most dense macronutrient for calories per gram, but it is not the key to getting your food in. If you're someone who struggles, I see this a lot with people who maybe aren't in the bodybuilding space and they just sort of think about getting their calories in on their bulk. That's where you'll really see pushing the fats to 100 grams a day, and they'll wonder why they can't get their food in. But the 9 calorie per gram, the fact that they are the most dense micronutrient doesn't mean that they are the key to get food in and sort of aid appetite and maintain an appetite through the off season. Since fats slow gastric emptying, they keep you fuller for much, much longer. Now, people will say protein is the most satiating macronutrient. I disagree. I think fat, if you hit 20 grams of fat in a meal, you're really like you're gonna struggle to be hungry for your next meal unless you're really lean or in a very, very far into a deficit. So the fact that they are dense is massively outweighed by that slowed gastric emptying speed. I use that example of the jasmine rice, 100 calories versus 100 calories of almond butter. Getting the rice in is going to be a whole lot easier. Now, the also, the other thing, the also, that's a good one, Jack. I might add that to my vocabulary. If we look into sort of guideline amounts for fat intake per day, I said that you establish your protein and fat and then work with your carbs. But the sort of guideline bookmark figures that I would give for fat intake are 45 to 60 grams. Now, obviously, this is phase dependent. You're not going to have 60 grams of fat in a training day in a deficit. You're going to pull that right down to bare minimum, which I think fats you can really get away with bare minimum fat. 45 to 60 grams I think is a nice sweet spot, only if you can prioritize whole, single ingredient food sources and you're not getting trace fats from oats and sourdough bread, a ton of that. If you're running baseline fats or minimal fats, bare minimum fats, you need to have good food sources in. We're talking salmon, eggs, dark chocolate, almond butter, avocado, macadamia nut oil, olive oil, stuff like this. You need quality fats to ensure you're getting a good fatty profile, good profile of healthy fats in your diet. So hormonal function is firing, and just your fat soluble vitamins are being absorbed well, and you're getting in enough vitamins. And these fat sources also come with a lot of micronutrients and fiber. We look at like avocado or dark chocolate, for example, or nut butters. These are coming with fiber and micronutrients. So to skimp out on them is quite silly. But what has changed in this push up for me and my previous push up is the fats have been kept very, very low. Now, I think value in this gastric emptying speed is key for a good push up. Previously, I didn't really, I enjoyed my food all the way throughout my last push up, so I never really thought I'm a bit full. I can't really eat this. Since I enjoyed the food, I was just like, oh, time to eat. So even when I'm 215 pounds, 4,500 calories a day, like 70 grams of fat in a training day, it wasn't affecting me. But now that I've sort of matured as an athlete and developed my knowledge as an athlete and a coach, I can see that no, we want the gastric emptying to be super, super fast. We don't want to run 70 grams of fat on a training day because this fat, yes, it's helping get calories in to an extent because it's dense, but it's not doing anything to training performance. And it's also readily stored as body fat. You know, dietary fat is in the form that's going to be stored as body fat. So there's big argument that excess dietary fat intake is going to lead you to a softer body composition in your push up. So I think, you know, my last push up, I ran 100 grams of fat in a rest day because I thought, you know, well, it's just fat, you know, it's a rest day as well. You can run higher fats, which is a common thought process, like for, you know, diet variety and getting healthy fats. But you don't need to go past that sort of 60 grams, especially if you're an enhanced guy, because you don't need the sort of dietary support um, with getting your healthy fats in to support your hormones, because you're obviously getting endogenous hormones if you're enhanced. But yeah, I think capping fats at around 60 grams, even on a rest day, I think the variance of fat on a training day to rest day also doesn't need to be in the aim to get adequate healthy fats. I think that can be achieved on the training day. If you are going to run higher fats on a rest day, it's understandable because you don't need the carbs as much for training performance, even though you want to feel the next day's performance. If your training day carbs, pardon me, are still high enough, you're going to be fueling that session on the day. So what I do think varying training day to non-training day fat intake is useful for is diet variety. Everyone loves the sourdough, eggs, smoked salmon meal in bodybuilding. Everyone loves their oats. Everyone loves more almond butter, more dark chocolate. So giving yourself that extra 5-10 grams of fat on a rest day where you can, you know, balance the calories out with the extra fat because you don't need as much carbs, it's going to be great for diet variety because trying to fit eggs, salmon, and sourdough on 50 grams of fat on a training day is difficult. And you know, you want to enjoy this process. I talk about this all the time where people forget that their bodybuilding sort of consumes their whole life, but you also want to balance quality of life alongside productive bodybuilding. So if it's going to make your life better, which I know it makes my life a bit better, have your sourdough, salmon, and eggs on a rest day and add 10 grams of fat on a rest day instead of what's that, 90 calories worth of fat. So 22 grams of carbs. Pull 25 carb out and have an extra 10 fat. So you can have that meal, you can have different meals on a rest day that you can enjoy, and then you know you're bringing in those fats, those different food sources now entirely, because you're not going to have the eggs or the smoked salmon on a training day. Now you're getting the extra healthy fats. You know, you're getting your omega-3s from your smoked salmon and your egg yolk, and then that really starts to play into your benefit. But if you're running 70 grams of fat on a training day, then food's going to be higher on a training day because most of us in this bodybuilding space, we follow a carb cycling approach or calorie cycling approach where food on training days is going to be higher. That obviously means food volume is going to be higher on a training day. So you've more total food to get in and you're putting high fats on these training days where you're going to slow your gastric empty and you're going to be extremely full. Appetite's not going to be there on the training days, which I think is not beneficial because, again, with this push up, I'm so focused on keeping digestion and appetite in a really, really good spot. Keep both of those firing, and you know, I'm happy. Anecdotally, I do think that 45 to 60 grams of fat, like bookmark or guideline figure, these guideline figures are pretty perfect. You know, if I think to my own plan, I'm 55 on a training day, 65 or 60 on a rest day. I follow a meal plan, so I don't know off by heart. But then we're talking 580 grams of carbs on a training day compared to 430 on a rest day. So making that calorie difference, still calorie cycling, carb cycling as well, so I can get the extra fats, the different food sources on a rest day. And yeah, keeping gastric. Yeah, what I was going to say with my own figures, 55, 65, they're still quite low, and anecdotally I'm finding I'm hormonally in a good spot. I have great energy throughout the day, libido is firing. I'm not crazy with mood swings or anything like I was in the depths of my diet where fat got to 40 grams a day. So holding that good amount or minimum amount of fat, but balancing it to the fact to the point where you're not getting negative impacts or negative side effects from the delayed gastric emptying rate. I've had clients where I've made the switch of their macros. I've pulled down their fat and protein and up their carbs to help appetite and sort of extend that runway for the off season. So what you really need to do for setting up your gain and phase macros is establish roughly 1.25 per gram, 1.25 gram per pound of body weight. I always get that saying quite mixed up. 1.25 gram per pound of body weight in protein. I think that is a very good ballpark figure. You're not undershooting your protein, so you're not going to have a negative impact on your recovery or your body composition, but you're not overdoing it where you're going to notice bad appetite and bad digestion from the excessive protein. It's also fucking expensive, mate. If you're to run 300 grams of protein, mate, good fucking luck on that food bill. Love to see how much chicken breast and prawns and beef mince is setting you back per month, and whey as well, with the whey prices going up. Then you have to decide, once you've got your protein intake, you've got the calories from what your protein target is going to be, you're going to decide what sounds the best for you in terms of your fat intake. Between that 45, I would even branch it out to 65 grams of fat. No, no more, because personally I do think even if your appetite is still high, you're delaying your gastric emptying to quite a degree with like 70 grams of fat. And you might start to notice that with bowel movements and stuff being slow. You might only go once every 2 days rather than daily, so you notice something like that biofeedback rather than actual appetite biofeedback. Because if you like your food, you enjoy your meals, the appetite really isn't going to play into things and make you notice that. So decide between 45 and 60 grams of fat. I would suggest you have to weigh up the pros and cons of better appetite or more varied food sources. So decide if you're sort of in the middle ground, or one extreme of the low fat, one extreme of the higher fat. Once you've got your fat and protein, then you take those calories away from your calorie amount, and you fill the rest in with carbs. And any sort of gaining phase or off season food bump that I'm making is going to be through carbs. The odd fat one will come if appetite has really just sort of fucking kicked the bucket, and you're like, okay, I might be able to get an extra 10 grams of almond butter in this meal because I'm already full. Might as well get the calories in. I don't think I can actually handle the extra 100 grams of food volume through carbs. So you go with a little sprinkle of extra fats. If I'm up in protein, it's going to be very few and far between changes to protein to a client's plan or my plan, because I'm setting it higher than body weight. So it's 1.25 grams per pound. As your body weight climbs in the off season, you're obviously going to need to keep that ratio up. So say I am on 235 grams of protein at 190 pounds. I might reach 200 pounds at some stage in this push up, and then I will probably up my protein to 250. And that's all you need to do. You don't need to be religious as well and stick to these guidelines of gospel. Just a figure that sort of roughly makes sense with your caloric bump. You're not really going to add more than 100 calories per day when you're doing a food bump. I think that's a bit ludicrous, because you're just asking for a crazy rate of gain or a crazy body weight spike that first week, but that all depends on your body's response. So say 100 calories, maybe 80 to 100 calories in the average food bump. There's 20 to 25 protein as body weight climbs up, but that doesn't need to be frequent. That can generally be delayed to 3, maybe more months in between each protein bump. And outside of that, when body weight is being, you know, tough, stubborn, not going up, training performance maybe isn't the same, and scale weight is stalling, that's when you add carbs. I would most likely add in 25 to or 20 to 35 grams of carbs per food bump, depending on the physique, depending on the athlete, depending on the phase. Because I know when I was reversing out of my diet, I could add in 40 grams of carbs every maybe 3 days, hold body weight. If I was to add 40 grams of carbs right now with my body composition, that would be too much. 160 calories worth of carbs, too much. I would add excess body fat because I would be in an excess surplus. This sort of phase, this point in a gaining phase where I'm, 7 months in, I can get away with a 25 carb bump, and that keeps me ticking along back into a surplus. So that is how you decide on your gaining phase macro. So I hope that one was useful. As always, any questions, I would love you guys to fire them my way. I love answering questions. The training is a big interest of mine, but also the nutrition side of things and setting up a diet to be optimal and make the most progress in the kitchen, not even in the gym, outside of the gym, is also another big interest of mine. I love setting up like meal plans and stuff and thinking, okay, this client will need 400 grams carbs, etc., etc. Which is another thing. If you don't know how to estimate your calories, everyone sort of prescribes this TD calculator for your daily calories. I think it's something to do with your eye. I can look at a client when I'm setting them up and say, okay, you need 180 protein, 250 carb, and 40 fat because you don't have a huge amount of muscle. You're sort of in that skinny fat phase. So if I push your food super high, you're going to get softer, but I know not to go too low. It is something to do with being more experienced as a coach. You can definitely estimate the calories someone is on, and more than not, I'm pretty bang on with where the rate of gain lands that client in the first week after just estimating their food. If they're coming to me with no previous experience of tracking food or no history for me of full days of eating and body weight trends, I'm pretty confident in my ability to estimate an amount of food and pretty hit the nail pretty much on the head with that rate again the first week. But as always with the podcast, going to leave things off with the takeaway of the week. And I can't really think of anything too educational this week, so we have decided to fill you in on the new top caffeinated beverages on my list. So before the pod, when I was setting up, we had a little Nespresso, and if you have the Nespresso Virtuo machine, you'll know that the Inizio pod is the goated pod. I've tried a ton of them. You guys know if you listen to me or follow me along, podcast, YouTube, stuff like that. I keep lists on everything, and Inizio tops the Nespresso list of about 30 pods, 30 flavors. And continuing on the caffeinated beverages, the new Monster Punk Punch is unbelievable. It is like the perfect tin of Monster. It's still a US import, so we can't get it just yet in the UK. If you find it in a boss man shop, a corner shop, it is going to sting you £4, most likely, but it is worth it. It is. If you know the OG can of mixed, it was literally called MIXXD. I think they discontinued it. It was full sugar. Before I was into the physique development side of things, I was nailing them. Tastes exactly like that, but it's obviously zero sugar. Ridiculously good. So get your hands on both of those, the Monster, the Punch Punk, and the Inizio Nespresso, because they are the goats in their respective fields. But guys, that is coming up to 30 minutes on the podcast. Do like to keep these nice and somewhat short and sweet, but gonna leave this one here as always. Drop me any questions, drop a comment on the YouTube, Spotify if you have a query regarding your off-season macros, and maybe we get another episode coming up down the line of setting up your diet and macros and how that differs to a gaining phase. So if you did make it this far, episode 7 of Faffing Over Frequency. Again, apologies for the hiatus, but I shall talk to you guys in the next one. Story tags, shares, likes, comments, subscribes, all much appreciated.